While the ever-changing news cycle does its absolute best to draw people's focus away from the most important aspect of this year's election, and really the most important aspect of all of American politics right now, I am determined, as you all know, to do what I can to keep people focused. And that is, of course, focused on the anti-democratic nature of the MAGA Republican Party and their willingness to just toss out our constitutional process in service of Donald Trump. And today's example of that is Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, who is desperately trying to become Donald Trump's vice presidential running mate, and thus she has to answer questions about Trump's attempt to block the peaceful transfer of power in 2020 and 2021 and answer them in the most anti-democratic way imaginable. And here's Kaitlan Collins on CNN confronting Elise Stefanik on what she would have done on January 6th if she had been Trump's vice president. And Collins does a good job of shutting down the dishonest talking points from Stefanik. Take a look.
The vice presidency, because you just said that you would be willing to serve in a Trump administration. Had you been vice president on January 6, 2021, what would you have done?
I stood up for the Constitution. I believe
No,
it was
what would you have done if you were vice president?
I would not have done what Mike Pence did. I don't think that was the right approach. I specifically stand by what I said on the House floor, and I stand by my statement, which was there was unconstitutional overreach. There was unconstitutional overreach in states like Pennsylvania, and I think it's very important that we continue to stand up for the Constitution and have legal and secure elections, which we did not have in 2020. And the tens of millions of Americans agree with me, Kaitlan.
Well, I would say the Supreme Court in the state of Pennsylvania said that Republican passed changes to their law was constitutional. But it's notable to hear you say, given you're in the running to be the vice president, that you would have rejected those votes. Come this election, when Vice President Harris is in that position, would you be okay if she rejected the votes if Donald Trump wins?
Listen, we need to make sure the election is constitutional and legal. We're talking about Democrats. Legal. It was not, Kaitlan. It was unconstitutional when there was circumventing state legislatures unilaterally changing election law. I stand by my statement on the House floor. And again, tens of millions of Americans agree with that statement and have questions about the validity and legality
are so in doubt about the election.
Because the American people have rightful questions on the constitutionality.
Because Republicans are
and
so in doubt.
Let me say this for you. When it comes to this election, we are seeing the Democrats trying to remove President Trump from the ballot. That is not constitutional. That is not a legal and safe, secure election. That's literally what's being discussed at the Supreme Court today, because radical leftists can't stand the fact that Donald Trump continues to skyrocket in the polls and Joe Biden continues to plummet. And when you get outside of CNN, if you get outside of CNN and talk to hardworking American people, like in my district, like across this country, they want to see new leadership in President Trump, and that's why he's going to win.
So, of course, the talking points there we've discussed so much previously. As Collins said, there are bodies responsible for determining if something is or isn't constitutional, and they've weighed in on this already, plenty, and they disagree with Stefanik. So really what Elise Stefanik is saying then is that if you personally feel, if you got a vibe that something was unfair in an election that just so happens to line up with your ambition for one person to stay in power, not if that's determined in a court of law, but if you have a feeling, a snowflake fifi, then you can block the peaceful transfer of power and just keep the current president in office. That's the argument there. And that once again leads us to the conclusion that this is not a democratic movement willing to say these things out in public even. Here, a Republican advertising herself to be a VP choice for Trump, openly saying that if she were vice president, she'd be okay with just not doing her constitutional duty when it comes to the certification of the election, and instead would unilaterally reject the results of the election if it didn't line up with her preferred candidate. And Kaitlan Collins' question perfectly shuts down all of what Stefanik said, which is, so you're okay then with the idea of Kamala Harris choosing whether or not this next election is allowed to be certified? That's the argument. If that's what you're saying, she wouldn't address it, but if that's what you're saying, let me calm down, about pins on January 6th, then great, Elise. Looks like Biden and Harris don't have to worry about campaigning because they could just plan on having Harris reject the results of the election and Biden staying in power. Or Harris can call up states and, as Republican Senator J.D. Vance suggested, say, hey, send me another slate of electors that reflect Trump winning even though he didn't. You remember this insane moment?
You didn't answer the question I asked. Would you have certified the election results had you been vice president?
If I had been vice president, I would have told the states like Pennsylvania, Georgia, and so many others that we needed to have multiple slates of electors, and I think the U.S. Congress should have fought over it from there. That is the legitimate way to deal with an election that a lot of folks, including me, think had a lot of problems in 2020. I think that's what we should have done.
So it's very clear you would have done what Donald Trump asked you to do there, not what Vice President Mike Pence did.
Hey, Pennsylvania, this is Vice President J.D. Vance. Yeah, we don't like that you sent us electors that cast their vote for Joe Biden. What's up with that, Pennsylvania? Well, sir, that's who our state's majority voted for. And we already certified the electors and they cast their vote for Biden in the Electoral College. No. I get that. Listen, I do, but Trump really doesn't want to leave the White House. He has this Coke button and he can click it. I mean, how cool is that? And he keeps getting these love letters from Kim Jong-un. He's worried if he leaves, if you guys force him to leave because he lost the election, they say, then he won't get those love letters anymore. What can you do for us? Is that how he imagines this going? Ridiculous. And by the way, he's also, J.D. Vance that is, interested in and being floated as a vice presidential running mate for Trump. So a prerequisite, I guess, for being Trump's VP this time around is saying that you would have undemocratically attempted to install him as the president after an election that he lost. That's the moment we're in. And I'll also remind you of another clip from a different wild interview Kaitlan Collins conducted with Republican Congressman Ralph Norman, where she asked him about the text he sent 3 days before Biden's inauguration. And he sent this text to Trump's chief of staff that read, "Mark, in seeing what's happening so quickly and reading about the Dominion lawsuits," 2 words for some reason, suits that are suits that lawyers would wear, attempting to stop any meaningful investigation. We are at a point of no return in saving our republic. Our last hope is invoking martial law. Please urge to president to do so, he says. And he spelled martial like the name Marshall and not martial law like martial arts. But what he was encouraging the president of the United States to do was seize military control of the government and then refuse to leave office. And here was his response recently to a question about this.
But when you talk about what the voters decide, I have to ask you, because you and I have never spoken before in an interview, about a text message that you sent to Mark Meadows. It was 3 days before President Biden was inaugurated, and you were urging the White House to use the U.S. military to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. Do you regret sending that message?
The only thing I regret, I misspelled martial law. I misspelled that. No, I didn't. Look, everything happened so quick in that election. The time that was given to see if the ballots were real, see if...
So we have Congress people saying they don't regret encouraging the president of the United States to conduct a military coup. A different Congress person saying she would have tried to block the peaceful transfer of power if she were vice president. And a senator saying the same. And they're all doing this in service of a man who wrote on Truth Social, I'll remind you, quote, "A massive fraud of this type magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution," calling for the termination of the Constitution. While he's also saying he'll lock up his political opponents in second term, the government should come down hard on media outlets he doesn't like, etc. If you have a shred, a scrap, an iota of respect for our Constitution and democratic process, you just can't vote, frankly, for this MAGA Republican Party. It's that simple. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. You can become a member at lukebeasleyshow.com/membership.